This is an important webinar for a couple of reasons. First, this is kind of the first webinar that we've done on This Week in Photo. I tried one many years ago that went down in flames, and I ran away screaming, and now we're back again with a new platform to hopefully this will go just fine. So I want to welcome you guys in there. The other reason is Troy Miller, my good friend who co-hosts the TWIP Pro Photo Critiques with me, is presenting. And one of the reasons I wanted to have Troy present on Capture One 12 is because he's been, for the last year plus, he's been sort of raving and singing the praises of Capture One and how amazing it is and how it's a step up from Lightroom and all these things. And I thought, why not have him come on and demo not just a demonstration of, hey, this is how all the bells and whistles within Capture One work, but also I wanted to see from a working pro. Troy puts food on the table with wedding photography. So the tools that he chooses are critical. He doesn't take them lightly. So I wanted to have him walk through his workflow and sort of tell us this is how a real, quote, real working pro does it. So Troy Miller is here. Troy, where are you at? I'm going to bring you up on screen here, if I can. Troy, I don't see you. There you are.
I see me. There you are.
I see you. So Troy Miller's in the house to show us. Troy, your video looks bad. I don't know if that's it might be me. Maybe it'll res up in a second. Yeah, I wanted to have you on to sort of talk about the reasoning behind you went with Capture One just briefly, and then I want to dive in and spend the majority of this webinar on your workflow, and we'll screen share and just show what you do and how you do it and all that stuff. And folks in the chat and that are watching this, if you have questions, if you scroll down to the bottom a little bit, you'll see there's a question answer or a question area that you can enter your questions. So when we get to the end of the webinar, we'll do a little Q&A segment, and you know, we'll look down there for the questions that you guys have posed. Otherwise, chat away in the chat box, and you know, I'm going to turn it over to Troy Miller in a second. Troy, what's going on, man? How you doing over there?
I'm excited to be the guinea.
you are patient zero, bro.
Oh, I love it. I love it. Hey, that's all right. That's okay. I'm good. I'm good.
Yeah,
having a good time. So.
No, it's gonna be good. It's gonna be good. I'm taking notes on how this webinar software behaves so far. You know, I got a couple notes. Couple screen grabs to send on to the makers of the software. But why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself? Tell us who you are, and you know give us a little sort of a brief intro of why you love Capture One so much before you jump into the demo.
My name is Troy Miller. I'm a full-time wedding photographer. My wife and I do this. It's been 27 years, as Frederick liked to point out, nearly 30 years. So, you know, having grown up in the Adobe environment, Lightroom, I always found limitations, especially for my fine art stuff. And I was always looking for a better piece of software. And Capture One came across. I think Renee Robin pointed it out to me the first time. And I started to play with it. And the more that I played with it, I'm like, okay, this has some potential. And I was sitting in an Airbnb in Hawaii on vacation, and I shot like 3,000 images on that trip, and I'm editing everyone in Lightroom and everyone in Capture One. And every time I edited it in Capture One, I was like, oh, I like that. Mm-hmm. And that was sort of the big crux for me. It took me another year to transfer over entirely because I had a very complicated workflow. So to get out of Lightroom and move that workflow into Capture One took me a little bit of time. But I learned Capture One on the way, which was perfect, which is what we need to do. You know, you need to be able to understand your system without thinking about it. So.
Yeah, very cool. All right, let's dive in. People are saying that the video quality from you is not looking good. Hey, folks in the chat room, are you able to see my, wait, let me bring myself up. How's my video look? Does my video look good or bad or ugly or which one? Let me know.
To me, your video is crunchy.
My video is crunchy?
Yeah.
I'm pixelated. Aaron Morris says I'm pixelated. Interesting. Okay, so we're both spitting out bad video. Okay. All right.
I got nothing running. So
Interesting. All right. Well, I can't restart the webinar, so we're gonna have to press and see
Yeah.
if we can get it going. Raymond Lowe says he can hear me, but he can't hear you when you're speaking. Bandwidth. Yeah, our bandwidth is good. All right, let's see what your screen share looks like, Troy. You want to go ahead and share your screen?
Yeah.
Hopefully that will look fine. Otherwise, you know, because looking at the details on a screen share may not be good with crunchy video. So
there we go. So there's the screen share.
all right, folks, we are sharing Troy's screen here. Let me know if you can see Capture One, and if it looks clear, awesome. Good. So who cares about looking at us anyway?
Yeah, this is great.
Good. So we don't have to show up on screen.
Yeah, that's perfect. That's perfect.
All
So
right. Some people are saying they can't hear you. Some people are saying you sound fine. So hopefully we will you know, that'll fix itself in a second. But Troy, why don't you go ahead and dive in, and I'll monitor everything from this side.
Okay. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through some very basic workflow within Capture One, show some of my favorite features. But one of the things that I find that a lot of people have struggle with is how to get images into Capture One. And what I'm going to show you is, for me, I have another palette over onto the side. Let me get into my flow. Here we go. So on my desktop, I have a folder called Capture One Demo Images, and that's a folder you can see in the lower right-hand corner. So I like to work in the catalog, and I like to have everything, all my images, stay in exactly the same place forever, pretty much. So as I've imported this Capture One Demo Images folder, it's going to stay in Capture One. It's going to show me it's going to mirror that. So I have another folder right here called Nick and Brianna Wedding Samples, and I'm going to import that. So there's two ways to do this. You know, you don't want to just stuff images in your computer and not know where they are. You need to know how things work. So you can do this two ways. I like to drag and drop right onto Capture One or right onto the Capture One icon. You can do that. When you do that, it opens up the import dialog box. That's how I work. That's just fast for me. You could also go in the top left corner. There's a little import images icon. You can click on that. It does exactly the same thing. It just makes you navigate to where you need to find your images. So for example, there we go. That would just require me to navigate. So I'm lazy. I don't like to navigate. So I like to drag and drop. And then not a whole lot in here that I'm going to talk about that you need to mess with, but it's very powerful. You can set styles to run an import. I don't do that. I want everything to come in raw. So I'm just going to hit import all. Now, for those of you that are coming from Lightroom, you're going to notice that I didn't have to wait a century to bring in those images. They come in right away, and I'm ready to go to work. So that's really the big thing about how to bring images into Capture One. It's very important for me that all my images stay organized and in the same place in my file system. So once they're in here, I don't move them. That's where they stay. So let's go back here. So just some basic adjustments that we're going to go through. If you're looking at the layout and the layout is kind of confusing to you, just remember you can customize this any way you like. You can right click on the top bar. You can customize this bar. You can put all these icons in anywhere you want. You can see what I have in here. This is your focus. This is my export or process. This is my copy paste. This is another copy paste icon. Make sure you set those up so that your brain is able to find the things that you need when you're editing. That was one of the things I struggled with in the beginning was, okay, how do I undo something? The basics. So those are there. Another little quick tip is if you go into crop an image, across the top, there's a little image icon for cropping your image, and you go in to crop that image. If you're coming from Lightroom, we're used to entering the crop icon again or hitting done. Well, that doesn't exist here in Capture One. What you have to do is just switch tools. To me, that's super intuitive now that I know, but it's a little confusing if you're not used to that. So those can be some workflow barriers for somebody that's new to Capture One, that's just like, okay, I can't figure out how to undo the crop or get out of my tools. So you just do that. So let's talk about some basic editing options. And I'm assuming, Frederick, that you're just going to jump in and interrupt me because I'm not reading the chat.
Yeah, I got you. I'm monitoring the chat and taking notes about what you're saying.
Okay, all right. And if I go too fast, let me know. There's so much stuff in here, and I'm trying to limit it.
You know, before you continue, I did have a quick question on the. You know, a lot of people that are interested in Capture One are moving over from Lightroom, right? Mm-hmm. So as you walk through the demo, if you could highlight the areas that are the Lightroom equivalent, so this sort of equals that in Lightroom, so that
Sure.
we know what the deltas are between the two apps.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the things in the basic editing that gets really frustrating, because if you're coming from Lightroom, immediately you love dehaze. There's no dehaze. You have to learn how to do that manually. At first, that seems really frustrating, and you're like, "Oh, I need that." You don't. What you have to do is learn how to use levels and curves, and it feels like a step backwards a little bit. But let me tell you, once you're good at using levels and curves, super powerful. But I am going to walk you through some basic settings. So for me, I bounce around a lot when I edit an image. So I immediately look at the image. I decide, do I need to make it brighter? Like in this image right here of Luis and Desiree, I never use contrast, because contrast to me just destroys the image usually. And what I like to do is I manually control the highlights and shadows through levels. And I feel that's more accurate. So if I want to clip the shadows, I do it in levels, gives me more control. Saturation, obviously, I like that. If you're coming from Lightroom, think of this as a cross between luminosity. No, not luminosity. What is it? Vibrance and saturation. It seems to be very protective of skin tone. It doesn't make him go bright orange, things like that, like you would expect in Lightroom with saturation. So it's very intelligent. And then we have our highlight and shadow in our high dynamic range palette. This was kind of weird for me at first, because I was so used to Lightroom having the whites and highlights and shadows and blacks. But what I found is that the highlight slider is very intelligent, very intelligent. So for example, if I overexpose her dress and I just bring back my highlight slider, notice, hope you can see that, it's really just bringing back her dress, which is really what's clipping. So there's probably some, amazing math going on in the background analyzing my image, but it is smart. So when you're doing like landscapes, you want to recover clouds, trust that highlight slider. It's really quite brave. It does a good job. And then the shadow slider basically just recovers your shadows. So think of your highlight and your shadow slider as some of your whites and highlights or shadows and, and blacks in Lightroom, but it's recovering for you. And then your levels are where you're going to clip those things to create more contrast. And then the clarity, of course, does clarity. It's like mid-tone contrast. And then structure kind of sharpens, can really increase noise if there's noise in your image. I don't usually use that on my wedding images. And I normally keep my my clarity down a little bit. So here's a little cool trick is most of these palettes in here, if you click on the option button in the top right corner of that particular palette, it says save as a default for the Nikon D5. And what that means is that if I set that clarity at like -20, every time I bring an image in, it's going to set it at -20. Or if I reset it through the reset option, it'll respect that default. So if you're constantly adding lower clarity, adding more clarity for weddings, I always bring up the highlight recovery because I have brides and dresses. So that would be a default that I would set. Just some little defaults there. And if you don't mess with curves and base characteristics, you're probably okay, but get familiar with levels. That's really going to give you a lot of superpower in there. It's just learning how to clip your shadows, clip your highlights over here for more contrast, things like that, which is different than Lightroom, which is something that I had to overcome. You have to stop thinking like Lightroom and just learn to speak Capture One, and then it's easy. So that's with the basic editing. So
no, Troy, just I want to before you move on to the next section, when you're in a Lightroom based workflow, for many people, they'll do a basic adjustment on a series of similar images and then copy those adjustments onto the rest of those images. Does that copy adjustment or sync adjustment feature exist in Capture One?
It does. Yeah. Good question. So for example, let's say I made this one black and white, and we're going to get to black and whites in a minute. So we're not going to follow along with that. But I want, say the second image, I want it to be black and white as well. So I can select that second image. And then what I can do, you notice the first image is highlighted more. I really wish it was highlighted a different color, because when you have a lot of images, it's hard to see, but just notice it. The left one is highlighted more. See how the right one is highlighted more, the left one, plus it shows on the screen. And this is where this double arrow comes in. is basically what that's going to do is copy the settings from your selected image and paste. And it gives you this nice dialog box. So I can choose what I want to include. So maybe I don't want to include color tags, or maybe I don't want to include metadata, but I want to include crop and I want to include color. And then you hit apply. And now that second image has the same settings. So also, if we come back here and we reset those, you notice in the top left-hand corner, I've got this like little multi-image stack. When that's selected, certain tools will apply to all the images selected. The other way that you can apply that, let's just crop this real quick. Let's say you had a series of these here. So I'm going to go back to my selection tool, and I want to copy this setting over. What I can do is in the top right-hand corner, there's an up arrow. So I'll select on that up arrow that just arbitrarily copies everything from that image. Select the next image, use the down arrow, just copies everything to that.
Nice. Okay.
So that's a very easy way to do that. I find that I use the double arrow all the time. So if I'm going through and I have a series of, say, family photos, I'll select the first image, do a little color correction. I won't do any crop. I select the whole batch, use the double arrow, paste everything into the next set, and then I go through and I finalize crop and rotation, little things like that.
Cool.
I got it?
Yeah. Yep. No, that's good. Yep. This is good so far.
All right. So moving along. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you some black and white, because black and white is really powerful in Capture One. It's powerful in all of the tools that we have, you know, Lightroom and stuff. But I'm not a big fan of using plugins, and I like to do everything manual. So what I do is up at the top across your palettes, you'll see these little tabs. One of the nice things about Capture One is you don't have to be in a module. You can do everything from everywhere. So for example, if I'm in grid view and I go to my adjustments, I can actually make adjustments to the exposure in the thumbnail view. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter where you are. But these little tabs up here align your tools, and you can customize those. I spent hours customizing these things. If you customize those, make sure that you go up to Window, Workspace, and you save your workspace. There's nothing worse than spending an hour organizing that and then it's gone because you reset it. So for black and whites, there's a couple ways to work with black and white. So desaturating is never the right way to do that. And one of the reasons for not just desaturating is you have no control over the color that's left in the image, because technically it's a color image, right? And I would like to be able to manipulate the colors, her red dress, the orange of the stones, but I can't do it if I just desaturate. So what you want to do is select Enable Black and White. Now this enables these sliders. Now these sliders you can see have effects on the image, which are really good. But the thing is it's generalized. And what I like to do is I'll go to the color editor, go to advanced. This thing, by the way, super, super powerful. This is your best friend, the color editor. Lots you can do in here. So now if I select her dress, you'll notice that it's selected red. And if I select like his pants, you notice that they're like in a magenta or a cyan color. I'll select maybe the building back here, and I'll select the ground. And they all selected different colors. Now the thing is I can manipulate those. So like her dress, grab the lightness slider. I can make her dress lighter or darker. Yes, it's going to overlap, but that's not too bad. So let's say I want to make her dress brighter to offset her. Then I can select what was the ground. I can darken that a little bit. So you see how I'm creating separation and contrast in the image just by manipulating the colors that the image had before. Let's see what we had. Like, I think this was the wall. Yeah, that fixes that wall back there. I'm going to jump back here just to show you the highlight recovery. See this bright spot in the top right-hand corner? I'm just going to hit that highlight slider, and look at that. It comes back. It's amazing. It doesn't affect the rest of my image. Just that highlight area.
And how would you, just a quick interruption, Troy, how would you do that in Lightroom? If someone there's a big highlight patch in the upper right of the image like this, what's the equivalent fix in Lightroom? Is it the adjustment tool with, or is it, you have to bring in Photoshop?
No, as a general tool in Lightroom, you would use either the highlights or the white slider, and it would try to target that spectrum of, we'll call it the histogram of the spectrum of light. So it'll try to clip it, but a lot of times it's generalized. It's over the entire image. I feel, and I can't answer to this, but I feel like the highlight recovery in Capture One is much more intelligent because I'm seeing it recover in areas, but not others. So it seems like it looks for the area that's the most clipped, and it recovers there. Where in Lightroom, I feel like it's more general, just based on a section of the highlight range.
Oh, it's location versus smartly looking at the tonal values and brightness.
Yeah. I really, I would love confirmation on that, but having used it for so long, I really believe that that's how that works. Because if you look at this image, like the window in the on the left-hand corner, it's fairly bright. But if I recover it, as I slide the recovery slider, that window's not really changing at all, where I feel like it would change a lot in Lightroom. So those are some of the things that I had to learn to trust that. And now that I have it, I'm just like, oh yeah, this is great. Just crank up that highlight recovery and trust it in all my images.
Nice. Okay.
Yeah, it's very good. So just to give you another really quick demo of the black and white, it's like, here's a landscape. We know the background's blue. We know the front grass is green. So I'm going to select both of those independently. I'm going to go back. And now I have control over those. And you can also change the saturation, which doesn't really affect it in black and white much. You could also change the hue, which doesn't affect it much, but it may move it in and out of the range. I won't get into all the advanced things that you can do with this color wheel, but just know that you can change the saturation range. You can change the color selection range. This is amazing. I'll grab that blue back there. So I could create a really dramatic scene without a whole ton of effort, right? I just selected the colors I wanted. I moved them around, made them brighter or darker. Very different image. If I create a new variant, so if I go to image, new variant. So a variant is equivalent to a virtual copy in Lightroom. So Lightroom, I think, is called the virtual copy. In Capture One, is called the variant. So basically, if I just reset that to like a normal black and white, you can see between that guy right there and that one how much manipulation that I have. And of course, don't over manipulate. Don't push the sliders too far because it inherits noise and stuff like that. So you got to really just sort of pay attention to what you're doing. So that's basically black and white. What you can do, though, let me show you this real quick, is in black and white, you have options to do split toning. Now, split toning is one of my favorite things to do, is because I can come in and I can affect the highlight range to a different color. So let's say, I think it's about 40. Bring the saturation down. I think it's like 40/40 is what I've figured out. Makes a good, there you go. Makes a good sepia. So that's a really good way to manipulate the colors in there, do multiple toning. It doesn't work on color like it does in Lightroom. In Lightroom, you can use the split toning and you can affect color on a color image. But in Capture One, you have to be friends with the color balance tool, which is down here, which I'm going to get into a little bit. This is also super powerful. It's a little daunting at first, but it gives you the ability to manipulate tones in the highlights, shadows, and midtones. But when you're in black and white, that's a good way to make a sepia. It's like 40, 10, 40, 20, I think is my formula.
And with these formulas, Troy, if you find one that you really like, you can save these as styles or as presets, correct?
Oh, you can. Yeah, absolutely. So let's say that I like this sepia tone that's right here and I want to save that. So what you can do is in the styles palette, in the top right-hand corner, there's an option where you can hit save user style. I actually put this little paintbrush in my palette across the top, my toolbar across the top, because I'm in it all the time. There's lots of options in there, but you want to hit save user style. And then it's going to ask you what options in there that you want to save. So make sure you go through this, because sometimes, excuse me, sometimes you may not want to use metadata or other types of composition or cropping. You just want to do maybe like your colors. And then when you hit save, it's going to ask you where you want to save it. So I might just put it in test right there, and we'll just label this sepia. So now if I go under test, there's my sepia, and I can go back to this image and I can apply sepia just like that.
Nice.
And just to, you know, to compare to Lightroom, the power in the styles is super amazing. Meaning in Capture One, we call them styles. Presets refer to individual settings per tool, where in Lightroom, everything is just called a preset. So if you hear the term style, it just means it's more adjustments. There's multiple adjustments per setting. But you can apply these things as layers. You can just, there's a lot, which, you know, we need many hours to go through all that.
Yeah, we'll probably have to do multiple Capture One webinars. One of the things I hope you're planning on hitting on, Troy, is the idea of those layers, because that's one thing that's one sort of the user interface or modality that that Capture One 12 has that Lightroom doesn't have. Lightroom has the local adjustment sort of metaphor, where Capture One has that, but you can also do those on individual layers and then manipulate the layers between them. Are you going to get into that a little bit?
Yeah, see, luminosity masking, we're going to get into that just a little
Sweet.
bit, which is my favorite. I got to say, I mean, it was one of the biggest reasons, and I actually have the image in here. This image right here is what convinced me wholeheartedly to go to Capture One, and I'll show you why when we get to that. So let's actually get into the color grading here just a little bit. So in adding color and tweaking color, some of us like to manipulate all of our colors in the image. Some of us may not want to do that. So that's where styles come in that other people can offer you. I like to manipulate all this stuff by myself. So what I'm going to do is, this is Luis. This is a wedding we shot in LA. It was super hot. So figured, hey, why not do a shot out there in the sun? So I just, you know what? I had flashbacks of how hot that day was. So, and here I am wearing a beanie and I'm cold.
Yeah. Speaking of your beanie, one of the questions in the Q&A section, someone wants to know, I can't find the question now, but they want to know what's under that beanie, but we'll answer that. Be prepared to answer that in the Q&A.
Well, you know, just for everybody to know, I combed my hair today before I put on the beanie. So, you know what? I wanted to be fully prepared.
You combed your hair? That means it's singular, or?
Okay. Yeah, at some point,
sorry, man.
We're gonna have a revealing. Yeah, no, not today.
I couldn't resist.
That's fine. That's fine. All right. So what we have is we're gonna play a lot with the color balance tool in here. And really, this is just a lot of experimentation for you. You just have to mess with it. So this is just an image that I wanted to get a lot of contrast out of. I wanted to give it sort of an edgy look. I'm kind of going here. Now, the thing is, I created a preset that does this, and I've kind of forgotten how to get there, but I kind of went back through it. So I'm going to walk you through some of the steps. That's the nice thing about a preset. You create an amazing looking image, save that baby, because you may not remember how to get back there. So for the most part in this image, I really want to create some contrast. So I want to bring those blacks down. I'm going for an edgy look, so that's okay if it clips. And the highlights, I might push the highlights a little bit because I want to see the highlights on that building to go up. And then I'm going to bring in my highlight recovery just to bring in back anything that might be in his shirt or in the building, and try to find that balance in there that makes me happy. So it'd be something like that. So I'm going to go back here. And because it's non-destructive, we all know how that works, right? Like you can up the exposure here, down the exposure there. It doesn't matter. It's all math. It's amazing math. I don't know how they do it, but I love it. It's magic. So I'm going to go into the color wheels here, and I want to affect the shadows. So I want to pull out a lot of the blue. So I'm just going to slide, and I'm going to click and drag this selector over here. Now I've got to say, it's a little frustrating that I don't have numbers, because I really wish that I could make sure that I know exactly where this is. Maybe it doesn't matter, but my brain says, I want to know. I want to make this the same. So you got to kind of look at these points, and this is selecting your color. This is actually a way you can tune the brightness and of that shadow area again. So it's another place where you can tweak. So I'm going to leave that right here in the middle. This is saturation, this left side. I'm going to increase the saturation there. Do kind of the same thing in the midtones because I want to pull out more of that blue. I'll probably get it right in there. I like that. And then the highlights. I want to affect the highlights. Now this is a good where you can do like tritones, quad tones, whatever you want to do, duotones. So like if I want the shadows to go a little bit more blue, or whatever. You can just really manipulate it a lot. Play with this a lot, and it's different on every single image. So bring some more saturation in the highlights. I'm just looking at his face. There we go. Now what happened is,
as you edit this image, would you say that the color controls are the main power in Capture One, or the biggest differentiator between Capture One and Lightroom is the exacting control over color?
Yeah, I would say that the color grading is huge because it's pro level. If you ever work like in a high end like video editor, you know, the color wheel and things like that are really super powerful. And this took me a little while to embrace, because in Lightroom it's a lot of sliders, and you could get here, but not with this level of control. And to be honest, this is actually very generalized, what we're doing right here. You can jump into shadows, midtones, and highlights and have a more accurate selection tool if you want to be a little bit more accurate. But where the real magic comes in, so yes, this is very powerful, but it's the color editor. Now you have a basic tool where you can just select a color tone that already has been selected for you. You can select general overall. You can change saturation and hue in here. And you notice you can make these changes in different places. So you can do saturation here, or just in your regular editing exposure palette. Does the same thing, just in a little bit different area. But this is what I really love, is the advanced. So I want to pull some of that purple out of the sky, but only in that color tone. So if I use the color picker, select in the sky, now what I can do is I can change the hue of that sky. Now the hue slider only changes, I think it's 30 degrees. Yeah. So imagine it's only moving 30 degrees around the wheel, but I can change that hue. I can select it again. I can change the hue again. I can select it again. I can change the hue again. So you can see where it's going around the wheel. It's going clockwise.
Yeah.
Yeah. So super powerful. Absolutely. And every time I make a selection, it creates a little tone map down here, if you will. I can go back and turn those steps off to pick the one that I want. Now, one of the things that you can do from here, and this is going to kind of lead into the next section where we talk about layers and luminosity masking, is I can select that sky, which is this layer right here. And then I can come up here, and here's where the deviation between Lightroom or basically any other raw editor really happens. And this is one of the things that sold me, is I can create a mask from that selection. Now, if you want to see the selection, you just click down here where it says view selected color range, and everything that's not selected goes black and white. Now we're going to select a little bit of the building. So I may be able to grab this and clip out that building, get more sky. Now we're just going to grab a little bit of the sky, as long as he's not selected and the building's not selected. Select on the options in the upper right-hand corner, create mask from selection. Excuse me. So now you see under the layers palette, I have this layer right here. If I hit M, it'll show me the mask. So that's basically what it selected. And now I can make more changes in that area if I want. I can come in here and I can change. Let me go back to my editor. There we go. I can increase the saturation just in that area. If I wanted to blend down the tones, maybe the highlights will help. Nah, not really. Let's bring down the right. There we go. So like with the levels, I can bring down and even out the brightness in the sky just by creating that layer mask.
Cool. Hey, Troy, I'm going to interrupt you real quick. Yeah. We're about 36 minutes into the webinar, folks. This is an hour-long webinar, so I just want to remind you, if you have questions for Troy, go ahead and pop them below the video. There's a questions area. Go ahead and pop your question in there, and we'll get to them in about 5-10 minutes or so towards the end of the webinar. Just a quick reminder.
Good deal. So this is the image that really made me love Capture One. So I'm going to increase the saturation a little bit. We're out in Kauai off of KA Beach, and I'm photographing the waves, and I'm like, the sand. I don't want the sand in there. I'm like, how can I get rid of that sand? Well, you could clone it, and that's just going to make it brutal, but it's a color, right? So if I select the sand, let me go back to, there we go. So I selected the sand. If I show you in black and white, you can see that I've selected pretty much the whole color range that would be that sand in there. I'm pointing at it with my finger, by the way. I know you guys can't see.
We can't see you, man.
Very animated, yeah. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to affect the hue of that brown sand. So I'm going to affect it counterclockwise. So I'm going to slide the hue to the right, and then I'm going to select it again. I'm going to slide the hue to the right some more. And then I may have to bring the brightness down just a tad. I may have to bring the saturation up just a little bit. And so now I'm going to create a new variant. There we go. Now, one of the things that if you're coming from Lightroom is if you're used to using a keyboard command, like command, what is it? Brackets or comma. I don't know what that is. Apostrophe, command apostrophe creates a virtual copy. In Capture One, I did the same thing. I just went up here and I went to edit keyboard shortcuts, make sure you name it, save it for yourself. And then you can pretty much make anything a shortcut. So I went and made some of the shortcuts the same from Lightroom because I just had them memorized. So now what you can see is this image on the right. Actually, I should be able, if I can remember how to do this. There we go. So the image on the right, you can see the sand really well. On the image on the left, yes, you can see the pattern, but the color I affected. And that's what I loved about it. I thought, okay, that's it. This is powerful. And this was before you could do luminosity masking and all that kind of stuff. So with that in mind, we are going to go talk about luminosity masking. So let me get down here. Okay, perfect. So basically what luminosity masking is going to do. Oh, look, I've already played with this one. Let me make a copy. Let me reset that. And let's just see what we did. Oh, that one selected her. Okay, so I'll just reset that.
And Troy, while you're doing that, define what luminosity masking is. It sounds like a lot of syllables, but what is it? What do they mean when you put them together?
So luminosity, there's a bunch of luminosity ranges within our image, right? Like the sky, the mountains, the grass. Those are areas of brightness. And the great thing is that through luminosity masking, we can select a brightness area based on the values of that luminosity. So, for example, like the roof on this barn, I just want to select the roof on the barn. So what I'll do is I'll create a new layer. Now make sure that when you create that new layer, if you're going to do a luminosity mask, that you fill the layer. So basically what I've done is the entire image is masked. Okay. Then I hit M in order to show that. And then I'm going to check Luma range up here. And what that's going to do is make sure you turn on your display mask so you can see. I'm going to start clipping by moving the shadow end of the slider, the dark end. I'm going to start moving that in and clipping out anything that's dark. I'm just basically getting rid of whatever's dark and only leaving what's light. So you can kind of see how that works. But I want just the barn. I don't want to deal with the mountains and everything. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to remove that layer. I'm going to create a new layer that is empty. So if I hit M, you can see there's nothing in there. This takes a little time to get used to. You got to just play with it a lot, just like learning your camera, right? You got to spend a lot of time in it. So I'm going to use the brush, local adjustment brush. Now, once you have your brush open, I'm using the brackets just like you would in Photoshop. Right click. I want to add a lot of flow. And I'm going to brush just over the barn. If I hit M, you can see I've added a layer mask just over the barn. Now I can apply the luma range to just that area. So coming down just like so. So I've selected just the barn top. There's a couple little areas in there, so that's fine. What I'm going to do is hit apply over here. I'm going to click on the erase tool. I'll make that a little slower, a little smaller, not slower. And I'll just erase some of those areas that I don't want to affect. Just like that. So now, turn off my mask. So now I can affect just the roof of the barn. And this is out in Jackson Hole. This is Mormon Row, by the way, and that's the Grand Tetons.
And you could do that. You could select the roof of the barn in Lightroom too with the local adjustment tool and have it smart and all that really quickly, and then just change the roof. But what you can do is do it on a layer, right? And have that separate from the rest of the image. And or am I missing something?
Yeah, I mean, you can get there, but one of the things that you don't have is multiple layers, and you don't have the power that we have. So, for example, let's say now I want to affect just the sky. So I'm going to add another layer. I'm going to do a linear gradient, and I'm going to select, because I don't want to select all the mountain, right? I just want to select mostly the white area. If I hit a mask, you can see what I've done, and I can adjust this down And in Capture One 12, they improved a lot of the radio. There's a radial mask now, and there's the linear mask has some more options, which we're going to run out of time if we go into all those. But the nice thing is now that I've selected that linear gradient for just the top, I can do Luma Range again, and I'm going to clip out all the shadow areas, basically the mountain, right? So I'm just going to be selecting mostly the sky. Now the lower handle here, that's how the edges fade off. If you can kind of see that in the top right-hand corner of the image, you can kind of see how that kind of blends in. I'll be honest, I don't touch radius and sensitivity. I haven't needed to, so I probably should learn what they do, but I don't. So now I've selected mostly the sky. So if I just want to pump in some clarity in the clouds, I can do that without really affecting the mountain. And then if I wanted to, I could do the same thing again. I could create another layer. I'll do another gradient. I'm going to come down to about here. There we go. And in this one, what I'm going to do is I'm going to clip out all the highlights. I'm going to pull the highlights out. So now I'm just selecting a majority of the mountain. Turn my mask off. Oh, I got to hit apply. So many things to do all at once. Turn the mask off. So now I can affect just the color in those mountains. So if I want to go over to my color grading tool and I want to take the shadows and I want to make them warm, I can do that. If I want to make them cooler, I can do that. I can take just whatever's going on in that selection that I did, I can affect, and it looks more natural. So now if I bring up, there's my virtual copy or my new variants. I'll select those. You can see those two side by side. So it's very subtle. Warmed up the roof, darkened the mountain, added clarity to the sky, and I did it all with luminosity masks without having to paintbrush it in or do a smart selection with a brush tool. And you can just keep adding layers and adding layers. I don't even know what the maximum number is anymore. It's far more than I'll ever add.
So, Troy, I just want to jump in real quick. Ozzy John in the chat is correcting me. He said, there is layers in Lightroom, only it's not called layers. All adjustment tools, each time you select and apply it, functions in principle as a layer, only you don't see the layers as you used to see in Photoshop. So just when you make a correction, it's kind of a layer in Photoshop, or I'm sorry, in Lightroom already. So I sit corrected.
Right. But one of the disadvantages, unless Lightroom has changed this, unless Adobe's changed it, but one of the disadvantages in Lightroom is you don't have all the tools available. In Capture One, you have all the tools except black and white. Black and white, some of the tools are limited, like black and white, in the layers.
Okay.
But in Lightroom, like, you don't have whites and highlights and blacks and shadows. There were some tools that were missing, and that was at the time that I made the switch. That was a big deal to me. Yeah. I wanted to access the more complex tools like the color balance tool and the color editor.
And this is an ideal time to just let the folks that are in this webinar know that on March 22nd, towards the end of next month, as we record this, David Grover from Capture One is going to do another webinar just like this one. But the focus of that webinar is moving from Lightroom to Capture One. So we're going to go into the nuances and all these sort of parallels between the different tools and the deltas and the pluses and minuses and all that stuff between the apps. So this one is obviously focused on wedding photography. That one on March 22nd with David Grover from Phase One / Capture One will be on the differences between Lightroom and Capture One.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, and he does great webinars. If you go to the Capture One website, they do webinars about Capture One almost weekly or bi-weekly. Mm-hmm. And that was one of the things that sold me in Capture One, I got to be honest, was the support. You know, being able to go in and just watch this content that is amazingly well created. I felt like I had a support system. I felt like I had information to go to. Lightroom, I didn't feel like I had that.
Yeah. Yeah. And those guys are amazingly, I've been talking to Phase One for a couple of weeks now. Those guys are amazingly professional and classy. So don't expect that webinar to be a Lightroom bashing presentation. It'll be more pragmatic and just be more of, okay, this does this and that does that, and this can't do that, and that sort of thing. So, which is what I want. So perfect.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we need the truths, so we're informed. So when we make a switch or we make a decision, we're using a tool, we understand how they work, you know? So And every piece of software has its limitations. So the more you learn about it, the better, and the more you can make it work for you.
Yeah.
So I was just going to show you this one real quick. I think we're good on time. I'll do it real quick.
Yeah, go
but
for it.
I just created a new layer mask. I filled that layer. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do change the luma range. I want to basically eliminate. Here we go. I'm sorry. I'm going to clip this. I basically want to eliminate my bride out of there for the most part. I want to make the arches darker inside. Now, the more that you play with this, the more that you're going to find uses for it. So now that I've clipped that, so now basically I've selected inside of those arches. I can go in here, which is my editing tools. Might bring down the brightness a little bit. I might go ahead and warm up inside the shadows. And then I can do the inverse, like I'll create another layer. I'll make sure that it's, oops, you know what I did? I'm gonna remove that and make another filled layer. I'm gonna do a luma range. What I'm gonna do this time is I'm gonna remove the shadows. Oops, there we go. I gotta select that, remove the shadows pretty much. I wanna select the building. And then I'm gonna select, there we go. I'm gonna select the erase tool and I'm gonna remove my bride from this. So she's not selected anymore. There we go. So now I'm just going to affect the building. So now I can pull the exposure down on the building. Ooh, that was definitely too far. But I can clip that. I can warm that up. I can add some clarity to it if I want to bring out all that texture. So it allows me to work in multiple layers at multiple tones to create images, because like on a wedding day, for those of us that shoot weddings, I mean, I get, I shot it kind of crooked. The lighting is a little bit flat. I didn't have time. I have like 3 seconds to shoot this, but I'm like, ooh, Capture One, I can fix that. So, which is my life. It's my workflow. That's what I got to do. So let's jump over into exporting, because one of the things that's really important is you got to get your images out. And the export tools within Capture One are quite powerful, but can be a little bit different if you're coming from Lightroom. So the very last icon we have here in our tool palette at the top is the little gear. And basically what that is that's your process recipes. Now, what you can do is we're going to do a brand new one right here. We'll just do hit the plus sign. I'm going to call this TWIP. Okay. Now, as you just look at the process recipe options, it's really kind of nice and simple. I want this to go out as a JPEG. Image quality, I'm going to pull this down like 70, because let's say we're going to push this out for social media or teasers or something like that. I'm going to set my resolution to 100. I like to set to the longest dimension, so the long edge, and I'll set to like 14. And then it's where do you want it to go? So right now the output location is my desktop. So if I hit the gear up here, which I put up there because I like to access it there, or down here under process summary, you can hit process. And what that did is it put on my desktop. You can see in the top right-hand corner of my screen, there's my image. Now I could create another one, and this is where the power of this really comes in. Let's call this TWIP 2, because I'm clever. I'm clever at naming. And let's say you want this to be a high-res JPEG because you're going to send this to your clients, 300 DPI. And maybe you want this one to go into a folder. So you go under File and then select a subfolder, and we'll call it like TWIP full. So I know it's like a full resolution image. Now I can do, let me get rid of this one off my desktop so it doesn't duplicate that. So what I can do is I can actually check multiple checkboxes. And when I process them, it's going to do whatever I told them to do. So look, I have one on my desktop, which is the small one. And then I have a folder called TWIP full, which I put in the big one. And that's how you get images out. You can be more clever. There's watermarks. Like for example, I have a Spicy Jello watermark. It's a small PNG. I can move that watermark around. I can just drag it anywhere I want to put it. I can change opacity of that watermark. I can change the scale and the size. And then I can output that on one image, or I can output that on all the images, whatever I have selected. So That's how you select that there. You can also do text. If you don't want to do a graphic, you can just choose to put in here instead of an image, you can put text. So you can just type your name in and you can put the copyright symbol if you want. There's a lot more you can do in here, but we're going to run out of time. So that's basically how you would create those process recipes. If you want to go back and change that recipe, you don't have to update it like you do in Lightroom. In Lightroom, it's murder. You got to keep saving a new export and update the export preset. I don't like those. In this, I just go in, select what I want, and go, you know what? I'm going to put the quality at 59, and it's done. That's it. I'm done. I can walk away. It's going to work. So,
awesome, man. Good presentation. Yeah. Thank you. I feel like we should, these webinars, or this webinar should have been like twice as long to get through all the things that we needed to go through. But the good news is you're working on a course on Capture One that we'll be releasing very soon, right?
Yes, we are working on that. I'm going to unshare my screen unless anybody has any questions. I can always go back.
There you go. And I'll put us both up. Thank goodness that screen share worked better than showing our webcam video, because we look like mashed potatoes up here. So sorry about that, folks. And we were having some audio issues as well. Like during our test, Troy, remember we were getting that sort of that echoey thing going on.
Yeah.
It's like that gremlin has returned, but you know, it's all in the you know, we're pioneers here, so we're working through it.
Yeah.
So let's dive into the questions in the last few minutes we have here. And I want to, again, remind people that you're working on a course, a Capture One course that I'll make available. You all, if you register for this webinar, you'll get access to it, as well as Troy has put together some presets. Some Capture One, not presets, sorry, styles. Styles. Can't teach an old dog new trick.
I know, it's
Capture One styles. The Troy Miller Spicy Jello Capture One styles. I'm gonna show them real quick before we dive into the Q&A. But here they are. They are in this brand new version of the TWIP School that's relaunching hopefully next week. But this webinar will redirect you over to this page. Otherwise, you can just go to frederickvanjohnson.podia.com and see these presets that Troy Miller has put together. We just uploaded these night before last, so these are fresh off the hot off the press. So yeah, definitely head over there and check those out. Those are at frederickvanjohnson.podia.com. Pretty soon they'll be in the TWIP School. All right, and let's do these questions real quick, man. So let me put us both on the screen here. And question one is from Joshua Sommerfelt, a member of the TWIP Pro community. Joshua says, what's under the beanie?
There's nothing under there.
There's light underneath that beanie. All right. Okay, so let's move on. Fabrizio says, I'm happy with Lightroom and have not yet tapped into its limitations, but I've heard about Capture One a lot. What would be the immediate and obvious benefits of switching?
Well, I think that as you grow into Capture One, it's the latitude of control that you have. You have a broad learning curve that you have to overcome if you come from Lightroom. But with Capture One, the adjustment levels and the control of your images go really deep. And what I would say is, if you're not fully integrated in Lightroom, that's the best time to switch, because it makes it a lot easier for you to learn the Capture One language. The other thing is, and I can't really stress this enough, it's the Capture One ecosystem. And for me as a professional, I want an ecosystem that's going to support me. So I have tons of tutorials from Capture One. I mean, just go to their YouTube channel. I mean, there's tons of stuff in there, and it's all chronologically organized. It's brilliant. And the support. I can go on, I can ask a question through their ticket system, and I get a response within a few hours. And they're very diligent at helping me solve that. I don't get that with any Adobe product. So that's huge to me. So production, support, you've got a community, and I think that's one of the biggest reasons. But long term, you're going to learn how to tweak your images better with better tools. Even if Lightroom makes changes, it's fine. You'll be versed in Capture One.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Thank you, Fabrizio. I think he's gone now. He had to go pick up his wife or something. The next question is from Andy. Andy says, so Capture One replaced Lightroom, but has Troy dropped Photoshop also?
I am this close.
Really?
Close. Yeah, I'm going to be doing everything in Affinity Photo. You know, I don't use Lightroom anymore. I have old jobs in Lightroom. Anything that's over 3 years old, I'm going to re-edit anyway. And Photoshop is literally pixel pushing, where I get in and I do some color correcting, or I might do some noise removal, take out branches, things like that. I'm not doing high level composites. You could do them in Affinity, but I don't need that. Mm-hmm. And you know, I don't mean to talk bad about Adobe. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm terrified every time I update, because I have a very complicated workflow system in Photoshop right now. I'm scared to death they're going to break it every time. They always break a preset. They always break, something breaks.
You got a house of cards over there, right?
Yeah, I just need to get away from that. So I'm working diligently at learning Affinity, and I got to say, I do love it, and there's some things it does better than Photoshop. What
do you, just to end on that, or we have a couple more questions, but the again, maybe this is another webinar, but the things that are missing from Affinity Photo that Photoshop has. You know, Photoshop has been around since the beginning of time, you know, and and as, which is a plus and a minus. It's a plus because it's so robust, it'll do anything that you need it to do, and you will never master Photoshop. But the minus is, you know, there's likely, like Lightroom, a lot of legacy code in there, and you know, and sluggishness, and a lot of stuff that you will never ever need, like 3D or video or stuff like that. What are the differences that you find missing that keeps you going back to Photoshop that Affinity Photo can't do?
Muscle memory.
Really?
Yeah, I just know Photoshop. So it's kind of that thing that we have to overcome. It's like switching from Lightroom to Capture One. It was like, oh God, I got to edit a wedding. And if I do it in Capture One, it's going to take me 3 hours because I don't have it customized. If I do it in Lightroom, I can get it done in 45 minutes. And that was, yeah, it's muscle memory. It's just getting used to that.
Well, I was building a thumbnail for one of the YouTube shows, and I felt like an idiot because I'm like, all I want to do is transform. Command T in Photoshop is transform. I can drag the handles. It's not the same in Affinity Photo. No, it's simpler because there's no such thing. You just click on the thing and resize it.
Do it.
So, yeah. So it's a lot of getting used to. All right, thanks, Andy, for that question. Next question is from Don. Don says, wondering if Capture One reads XMP files from Lightroom. Does it read the sidecar files?
It does read some. It won't read the adjustments, obviously, but it'll read things like keywords, stars, colors. And there's a setting in Capture One that you want to set to read your XMPs, like full sync the XMPs. And that way, all of your data from Lightroom, like I use Photo Mechanic as well. So if I star something in Photo Mechanic, it reads it just fine. It's just the basics. You're not going to get any tuning.
I was going to say no raw adjustments, right? Because I was going to say, how do you handle raw adjustments when you have two different raw processing engines going on?
You don't. I mean, you know, if you literally want to edit the same job, separate the files, duplicate the files, don't edit the same files. It does kind of work because Capture One and Lightroom have different databases, but I've had issues with it. So yeah, just don't try to do that. Just separate them out. So
okay. All right, Don, hope that answered your question. Next question is from Stephen Scharf from the TWIP Pro community. What's up, Stephen? He says, Troy, I hope you will discuss luma range and luminosity masking on a layer in Capture 112. You did that, right?
We did that. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. And we
checkboxed.
Yep. And just to be clear, we just touched on what that tool can do. We just touched on it. We could do a whole hour on layer masking and luminosity range. It's super powerful. So don't just think that it's just a little bit we did.
Cool. All right, next question up is from Alan Morris. Alan says, you say it took a year to migrate from Lightroom. Did the change handicap your workflow while you were learning?
It didn't handicap it, but what happened was at some point I had to decide I'm going to edit this whole wedding in Capture One. And then I have a whole export preset settings because I output for social media, I output for printing and things like that. So I really had to just decide what the workflow looked like, and then it was speed. It was really speed. So for me, I use Palette Gear, and I have what's called a Shuttle Pro, and I had to program all the buttons because I actually exposures, I don't touch the sliders or I don't touch the contrast sliders. It's all done through third-party peripherals. So it's very fast, and I had to figure all that out. And that just really just took a little bit of time. Once you've learned how to make an adjustment, it was quick. My wedding stuff took me a year just to get it dialed in. All my personal work, I switched immediately, and that's it. Every shoot from here on out, I edit in Capture One, and that was easy.
Love it. Love it. Cool.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Alan. Next question up is another one from Joshua Sommerfeld. He says, I noticed that Capture One doesn't seem to have as many lens correction profiles as Lightroom. Can you download more? How does that work?
I don't know a lot about the lens correction within Capture One because I don't play with them a lot. I normally turn that off because I know what my lenses do, and if it's fisheye or if it distorts, I like that look. So I don't want them fixing it. So I actually turn that off. One thing I do know though is that when you bring an image into Capture One, it's not just a basic bare profile. Capture One is actually, Phase One has actually gone and done testing on that camera with that lens, with that sensor, and they've sort of built a camera raw preset profile into Capture One. So when you bring that image in, it's already closer. That's why you'll see a lot of times people say, oh, it just look better when they come in. But I wish I knew more about the lens correction, but I just don't use it. I turn it off. So
all right, time for some investigating, or hold your question until the next Capture One webinar that we do.
Yeah, David would know.
Yeah, David will know. Thanks, Joshua, for that. Next up is Stephen Sharf again. He says, please ask Troy how to view the RGB numerical values in the toolbar. Keep turning them off and can't figure how to get them back again. You know how to do that?
No. I don't look at it.
Even sounds like you got some investigating to do here. David Whitehill says, are there major differences between Capture One 11 and 12 that would be worth upgrading? Do you know what the major big differences are?
One of it is luminosity masking. That was huge. That was in 12. What was the other big thing? I can't remember right off the top of my head, but the luminosity masking and the layer masking was advanced in 12. That was huge. I think they improved the support for DNG files. So if you were like me, if you were somebody that thought that it was a good idea to convert your files to DNG, it was not a good idea.
Really? Yeah, you hate DNG, if I recall correctly.
Don't even get me started on that whole process. Oh my God, that was a freaking nightmare.
Really? Jeez.
Yeah.
All right, we'll have to go into that later. We'll go into that later.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of tools to upgrade. I think 12 was a huge improvement. Speed too. Oh, speed was a big improvement for big libraries.
I was going to ask you that. That was in my notes to ask you on performance differences. A lot of people complain about the performance of Lightroom. Do you notice an sort of appreciable difference on like similar sized images in Capture One versus Lightroom?
I do. Yeah. So in Lightroom, when you bring in an image, if you really want to get the most out of it, you got to do smart previews and change the performance setting to use smart previews, or you got to render 1:1. And that takes a ton of time. Capture One does all that kind of stuff in the background, and you can choose what you want it to render previews at. So it has those previews previously rendered for you. And then jumping from file to file and zooming in and checking focus, to me, it's just much more robust. The settings don't lag. Like in Lightroom, I would have problems where I would slide the exposure slider and I would watch it draw, the adjustment kind of thing. Capture One doesn't do that. I feel like Capture One is like a scalpel, and Lightroom is like a really good knife, and it just doesn't have the efficiency. Now that's just me on my system.
Yeah, I was going to say your mileage may vary depending on your processor speed and the age of your computer and memory and all that stuff. So
yeah, but I've certainly felt a performance improvement across the board. So cool. I will say though that if you're going to move from Lightroom into Capture One, don't just copy 50,000 files out of your Lightroom library and dump them into Capture One. It's a lot, and Capture One struggles with really, really big databases because what it does in the background, it can kind of slow things down when it's drawing previews and metadata syncing and stuff. So do it incrementally, and then it's fine.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. David may have a different suggestion on how to do that. That was just my personal experience.
Okay. Yeah, and I've asked folks in the TWIP Pro community to post their questions for you and David in there, so we're good.
Cool.
The next one is another one from Steven. He says, Troy, please add some content to your course on printing out of C1 and in an ICC color managed workflow. That's a good one. So printing.
Yeah.
And Steven, just FYI, speaking of this whole new webinar tangent that TWIP and myself are on, I will be doing a webinar with the data color people, the makers of that spider. So we'll be doing a webinar shortly that talks about color managed workflows and printing and moving around to different locations. And there'll be an interview that I did with some folks from John Walrath from Data Color that talks about basically the pointed questions that I asked him were, are we chasing a unicorn, chasing color, considering, color shows up on all different devices and we all have different rods and cones in our eyes and different lighting conditions. Is it possible to get color accuracy? So keep an eye out for that. Next question is Steve Dickerson. He says, how do these Capture One organization and culling features match up to Lightroom? Yeah, that was another question that was in the chat, Troy. Someone was saying, well, the Capture One can't hold a candle to Lightroom in terms of digital asset management. And someone else chimed in and said, yes, it can. What do you fall on that?
Okay, so it does the same thing. You can do stars, you can do smart albums, which in Lightroom they call them smart collections, which is all based on keywords and all kinds of. So it does all that. Yes, it can do all of that, and it does it really, really, really well. The limit that I found with Capture One is giant libraries. So like I have my personal library has 80,000 files in it. Capture One is a little bit slower when I go in to look at a smart album of all my portfolio images. That may be like 3,000 images. Mm-hmm. So it's a little bit slower. Yes, it works. It does the same thing. It has just the same amount of power, the same amount of filtering. All of that is there. Lightroom does have a little bit better. I'm gonna use the term database management. Maybe it's a little faster. It's a little crisper. Mm-hmm. So if you're really reliant on that for your day to day, I would consider thinking about how you integrate the two or something of that nature. Okay. Yeah, but I personally haven't had any database issues, and I have on my laptop. I have a giant set of images, and I have probably 30 custom smart albums that I'm in all the time, grabbing images and sorting images, and it's very powerful. It does the same thing.
Awesome. All right. Next question from David Whitehill. He says, is culling better in Capture One than Lightroom? And you mentioned that you're still using Photo Mechanic. So can you talk a little bit about that? The differences between culling and the Capture One and Lightroom, and why you're still using Photo Mechanic.
I use Photo Mechanic because I have it and I've been using it for eons. Again, muscle memory, and it's fast. It's one of the fastest browsers there is. I will say though, to be honest and to be fair, if Photo Mechanic wanted me to renew, I would not. I would start to do everything in Capture One because I feel like the culling speed, jumping from image to image, is super fast. One of the things that we didn't touch on is the focus tool in Capture One, where you select an icon and it shows you what is in focus in the image, and that's huge.
Oh wow!
And it doesn't.
Okay.
Yeah, it doesn't work on JPEGs. It works on RAW files because the way I understand it is it actually pulls focus data from within the RAW file to tell you where the. Cool. Yeah. Oh, it's amazing. And so you can just have like this beautiful green mask over everything. So in a thumbnail view, when I'm culling, I turn that on and I'm like, well, you're clearly out of focus. There's no green mask on it. So I'm going to skip you.
That's interesting. I've never seen that before. Okay.
Yeah. I do a lot of culling in Capture One on my laptop that I don't use Photo Mechanic for.
Cool.
So yeah.
All right. Stephen Scharf has a anecdotal comment here. He says, Troy is correct. Each supported camera has a specific Capture One profile built specifically for it. So yeah, I think the question was, if it doesn't have one, is it possible to load it? And then is there a location to find that? So we'll have to follow up on that, or maybe save that for David.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know.
All right. Stephen also says there are Fujifilm styles in Capture 112. Nice. Stephen hates Fuji. I don't understand why he hates Fuji so much. Stephen, Fuji cameras are awesome. Stop hating on Fuji. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, I will add, because I just mentioned this last night to a buddy. If you're a Sony shooter or a Fuji shooter, you can get Capture One, the full program, at a dramatically reduced price, but you can only use it for those particular files.
Yeah.
So that might be a really good incentive for you, because if you're a Sony shooter, why not? I mean, it's not that expensive. So
yeah. And I would encourage you to head over to Capture One and download the trial if you haven't yet. You can get to it. Use my affiliate link. Just go to twip.pro/Capture One. twip.pro/Capture One. It'll take you to a page that has all of their different variants of the software, the Fuji, the Sony, the generic one, all that stuff is listed there. So please go check that out.
Yep.
All right. Harold says the big difference between Capture 111 and 12 was vertical masking, elliptical masking, and luminosity masking. You know
the
about
radial gradient. Yes. What is that? Well, you know what a linear mask is, right?
I do.
So we played with the linear. This is circular. So you can draw a circle around something and it gradients to that or away from that circle.
Can you then, if you draw an elliptical mask on something, can you then go in and edit that ellipse that it's created, like sort of fine tune and paint things out? You can do all that.
Yeah, and you can use luminosity on it. Yeah, yeah. That's why I said there's so much you can do with the masking that we didn't even touch on. You know, I feel like I just really feel bad, glazing over the luminosity in the masking section as quickly as we did. It's more like, hey, it's here, go play with it.
Yeah,
but you're right. The radial gradient, that was brilliant.
We'll have to do that again. Stephen has one final question here, or a rhetorical comment. He says, this is regarding the data color webinar that is forming up. He says, please discuss the differences between calibration and profiling with the data color folks. Definitely will do that, Stephen. I'm just going to look through the chat real quick to see if anyone posted any questions in here. It looks like there's Oz John says the big difference between Capture 111 and 12 is the price. They asked 75% of the previous price to upgrade. Okay, there you go. Michael Couch is in there. He says, you talk a lot about what Capture One does well. What was your hardest challenge to switching, and how did you find your way around the issue?
The hardest challenge was how familiar that I was with Lightroom. And going into Capture One, I wanted the same tools. I wanted things to work the same. When I hit the crop tool and then I hit the crop tool shortcut again, I wanted the crop tool to go away, and it doesn't do that. So it was learning to speak Capture One and sort of letting Lightroom just go, because I was so ingrained in Lightroom. And even to this day, I can walk you through processes without even touching the computer, right? Because I've worked in it so much. That was the hardest thing, was just let Lightroom go to Capture One, learn to speak the language of Capture One. And that's what I did.
You gotta start fresh. You gotta start fresh. Let's see. Here's another question from Craig Stamfley in the chat. He says, is there a spot removal or clone out feature? Because there is. Lightroom.
Yes, there absolutely is. Actually, there's a couple different ways to do it. You can do it in a layer. There's a shortcut tool at the top in your icon bar. And what that does is it just allows you to quickly pick, but you can also do a heal or clone layer. So when you create a new layer, you have an option to create a heal or clone, and then you go around and you just start picking all the dots.
Very cool. All right.
Yeah.
Well, that's it, man. We ran a little bit over, about 18 minutes over, but that's 16 minutes over. That's not bad for the very first webinar. There are a few technical issues, but I think we'll overcome those for the next webinar. I'm confident. Thank you, folks. And thanks everyone for coming in. I was telling Troy before we started this, I was blown away by the number of registrations that came in. And then I'm also blown away by the number of attendees that showed up to the webinar. So thank you guys for coming. I appreciate you. Thank you. There will be a replay of this webinar available, so watch your inboxes for a link to that. That should be showing up very shortly, so you can go back if you missed anything. Also, you'll be getting an email that tells you about the upcoming webinars, and that's the Capture One for people that are transitioning from Lightroom to Capture One, as well as a color managed workflow from Data Color. So keep an eye out for those. Troy Miller, any parting thoughts you want to share?
Hey, go get Capture One, download it, throw yourself in there, go play with it. Don't make any excuses. You know, get some snacks so you can hang out. You gotta saturate yourself in it. You have to. It's worth the effort. At least download the demo and run through, you know, the question. And then get on Twit Pro and let's talk about it. We'll answer questions there. Yeah.
All right, cool, man. Thank you so much, Troy Miller. We'll see you. We'll see you online, man.
Yes, I'll be there.
All right, take care.
All right, take care.